Welcome to Planet of the Associations. I'm Seth Kahn.
And I'm Mark Levy.
And we are going to be talking about all kinds of things, but not so much about associations, even though it is Planet of the Associations, because everything we talk about applies to associations, whether it's cosmology, mathematics, origami. Now, you talked about origami before. I want to hit origami sometime in this 30 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, we will.
Okay.
Will. Well, and again, the idea of what this whole thing's about, just to remind people, is the more you approach something head on, the more predictable your answers will be. So there's plenty of head-on answers out there. And we have head-on answers for associations. It's not like we don't.
Right.
But we just thought that it might be interesting to have conversations that were a little more like taking indirect paths and then bringing the ideas back there and saying, okay, is there anything to learn for associations? That's what this whole thing's about.
And another element of that aesthetic is that we know that innovation happens almost all the time at the periphery of a particular domain. And so we're like literally spending all of our time at the periphery and every once in a while shooting an arrow back into the bullseye.
Right. Well put. I like that. That's right.
So in our last episode, we were talking about value, and I think value is a wonderful thing to explore. And I made the claim that all value in a business context is double-sided.
I promised to refute that claim, even though I didn't know what the claim was going to be.
Yeah, and we're going to hold you.
I want everyone listening to this to work hard with me to refute whatever Seth says. All right. So I'm going to be trying here. Let's punch holes in it. Go ahead, Seth.
So when there's a value transaction, it happens between two or more parties. And I would argue that each party has to be getting value out of it. Otherwise, it's not going to work as a business model. So for example, let's say I'm an association and I am producing a webinar, and the webinar is being sold to my members. All right. The two parties are the members and the association itself. It has to be worth strategically and revenue-wise the time of the association, some justification. Maybe it might not make money, but then it has to be in the domain of the mission or something that a lot of members are interested in, or somehow it has to make sense in the association's world. And when the member experiences it, they have to say, oh, that was worth my time. That was really good. I like that. Those represent the two sides. Or if you want to take a more mundane example, I'm really into candy, by the way. I love Snicker bars, Milky Ways, Almond Joys. I think creating candy is one of the coolest things ever. So
right. You mentioned Snickers in the last sentence.
That's right, because it's there. I mean, when I think of creativity, getting the right mix of milk chocolate and caramel and nougat and peanuts and, pulling it together in a way that millions of people will want it at least once a day. I just think that's incredible. And if you look at, Heath bars and Mounds and Reese's cups, there's really a pretty small subset. Right? I mean, it must be under 30, Butterfingers, all of those bars that kind of make it to the head of the pack. And they're all packaged. They're really tiny. They're really small. And they have a lot of punch. Right? So Mars, when they make a candy bar, it has to be worth it to them, because they're the ones who have to go out and harvest the almonds and figure out, what the right proportion of caramel to nougat is, and then make the manufacturing devices that are going to cover it in chocolate in just the right way. And they have to design the wrapper so that people's eyes are drawn to it and there's a recognizable brand. It's got to be worth it. There's got to be enough money coming in that they say this is worth our time. And of course, if you're the person buying it, it's got to be worth $1.29. I remember when candy bars were 10 cents. It's got to be worth, what you pay for it at the cash register, so that you got this double-sided value. Both parties are getting what they want.
I always liked M&Ms. Not only do I like the flavor of M&Ms, but in my mind, like an M&M, a bag of M&Ms, it's kind of like you were getting 50 candies in it. So in other words, this $100,000 bar, I'm just getting a bar, but this I'm getting like 50 individual. So I always like mass and things. It's like if I went into a diner or so and I would order a hamburger, like a cheeseburger with fries, I was always disappointed if there were so few fries that you could count them. It's like, there's 9 fries on this plate. It's like, you shouldn't be able to count the fries. I'm sorry. There should be so many fries there that they're just not countable. So to me, Eminem satisfied that.
You know what that reminds me of is so we occasionally eat Chinese. I don't like Chinese food as much as I used to. I used to love Chinese food, but for whatever reason, maybe it's because there's more choices. I like Thai, I like sushi. Every once in a while, I like Chinese, and we never save our Chinese food. We don't, because we just don't like it the next day, right? So no matter how much is left over, it goes in the compost. However, when we go and pick up our Chinese food, we often will remark, oh, they gave us so much.
Right.
It's a value add when we're not going to eat it. What's that all about? I mean, that's, that just goes to show that we don't always measure things in the ways that we think we measure things, right?
Right. Well, there was in the world of information marketing, when you used to get stuff through the mail, there was this thing called the thud factor.
The thug factor.
Thud. T-H-U-D. Thud factor. Right. That you should send them a manual that's so thick and all these videos and whatever it is you're going to sell, that when the package arrives at the door, it lands with a thud. And that the thud was supposed to be value. That there was value in the thud.
And people still do that. I mean, I am digesting learning continuously, as anybody who's surviving in the 21st century is, right? So I've got to learn tons of stuff every day. And have you ever really wanted to know something, and then you go to a site where somebody's going to sell you a package and they'll say, there's 35 1-hour videos.
Right.
It's like, I don't want that. I want 5 minutes, right? I want it all in 5 minutes. That's the 21st century. But it used to be that the 25 CD set was like a big selling point, right?
Right. Yeah. All this is reminding me of to go to the world of entertainment. I like to go to the world of entertainment all the time. So it reminds me, the director William Friedkin. So William Friedkin made two of my all-time favorite films. He directed the film The French Connection with Gene Hackman in 1971 and Roy Scheider, and he directed The Exorcist. Was his next film in 1974. Oh, right. So I adore those films like anything. So the way Friedkin, before The French Connection, and we're going to make this have to do with associations, trust me. I don't know, even as I'm saying this, how it is, but it will have to do with association. So Friedkin had directed, I think, 4 films pre-1971, and they did not do well. The Night They Raided Minsky's, Boys in the Band. He did a bunch of films. He did Sonny and Cher's first film, which he wanted to find every copy and burn. It was called Good Times. So he did 4 films, and so he was friends with the famous director Howard Hawks, who did a lot of John Wayne films and so he asked Howard Hawks, he said, do you like my films? And Howard Hawks said, your films are awful. And as a matter of fact, your films are so awful that pretty soon you're going to run out of opportunities to do films. You've done 4, they're not going to give you films anymore. So you better do something that works. And so Friedkin's wondering, how do I do that? And so Hawks said, right, and this is what he said, you've got to entertain people. People seem to like car chases. Why don't you do the best car chase ever filmed? That was his charge. You want to entertain people. People seem to like car chases. Do a car chase that no one has ever seen before. And so that was, Friedkin then took on The French Connection, and he made, which to me, even today, is still the greatest car chase. I mean, and I've seen all these Fast and Furious and all these computer generated ones. The French Connection car chase was amazing because it was all done for real. As a matter of fact, I think most of it was done in, I think, Queens or Brooklyn, and they didn't even shut down the streets. It was genuinely dangerous. And as a matter of fact, it was so dangerous that Friedkin didn't want the head cinematographer in the car filming. So because that guy had a family, And so Friedkin decided, I have no family, I'll do the filming.
Oh,
so
wow.
like the behind Gene Hackman's shoulder, that's Friedkin operating the camera because he didn't want to endanger someone else. So the French Connection was a phenomena in 1971. It was huge, and it won Best Picture of the Year. And the driving force of it was, you want to entertain people. People seem to like car chases. Why don't you make the best car chase ever filmed?
Wow.
How does that apply? I know how it's applied, but I'm quizzing you.
Oh, I see.
How does this apply to associations? What can they take away from this?
Well, one of the things it makes me think of is that if you really want to push the envelope on something, you have to be willing to take risks. And that's what a remarkable risk to take, and I've read just a little bit about that car chase, not as much as you, but I do know that they didn't shut the streets down to do it. I think they worked with the NYPD to make it as safe as possible with some control of traffic, but they didn't block it off like most movies do, where you have, only Hollywood actors on the set.
It couldn't happen today. They would never have allowed it.
Right. They wouldn't allow it to. And if you think about the risk he's taking literally in that seat, one of the things I think that I'm always looking for from the CEOs of associations is for them personally to take more risk in the value that they create. So once you know what somebody wants, how do you kind of push it to the edge? What's the frontier? And can you work the frontier? Because if you've got they seem to like car chases, that once you've got that important piece of information, now you know what frontier you're going to push. And now all of a sudden the scope gets really tight. So you can start talking to people about car chases. What makes them thrilling? What is it that people, what gives people that sense of being on a ride while they're sitting in their theater seat? What is it that makes people gasp? How are you really going to push the envelope on that? And it sounds like, and I didn't know nearly as much as you shared, but it sounds like one of the ways he pushed that was to literally put people in danger and to capture that on film.
Right. Oh, yeah. That for sure happened. It's interesting that you took it on personal risk, on courage and personal risk. I had actually not thought about that as a differentiation expert, right? That's who I am. I differentiate businesses and brands and thought leaders or so around a big, sexy idea. I actually thought of it from the point of view of this is actually important. Now that I think of it. I wasn't starting with this thought, but here comes an important thought. So there may be something in your association that organically is the thing to push, but you may need to create it. Right. And that's something that I find, because I work with lots of people on their differentiation. People sometimes just expect to find gold at their feet. And there may be, but just as often, like I'll say, okay, we need to create something to this. Like what's here is good, but we need to create something to take it further. But that's okay. I tell the story often. Everyone knows the story about Volvo and their differentiation, right? Volvo is what? What kind of a car?
A safe car.
That's right.
A family car.
Well, that's exactly right. So Volvo back, I guess in the 70s, I'm guessing at this, they wanted to differentiate and all the cool spots of positioning were gone. And so Volvo said, well, we want to be for the family. And I think families, like they want safety and no one is for safety. That's not an idea someone has claimed. Volkswagen is like the ugly car, and so forth. Like all the bug, and like all these things have claimed different things, but no one's claiming to be the safe car, and we think that might be important. So what they first did, there was nothing about their cars that was safer than any of the other cars. I'm not saying their cars were dangerous. They weren't dangerous. I'm just saying their cars were like other cars were as safe as their car. They had no like real head start really on anything. So what they did was they first claimed in the marketplace. It was first a marketing idea. It's like Volvo, we're the safe car. And then they started to put all their engineering behind making the safe features, the cages in the evolve, like all the stuff. They declared it, and then they started to create around it. So it reminds me of what Howard Hawks said to Friedkin. It's like, you want to entertain, people seem to like car chases. Why don't you make the best car chase ever made? And so that's the idea of the field's crowded. No one seems to be about safety. I think people like safety. Let's make the safest car that there is on the road. So with associations, it's like picking, it's not just the thing you're doing now, but it's like, oh, people like car chases. People want safety. Like, what's the thing to claim that may first be a marketing claim, but then how do you start engineering it as part of a real part of your everyday business?
Yeah, we were talking earlier about value, and I was talking about how the value for me is in that compelling visceral lust where you say, I want something, where I want it badly enough to part with my own resources in order to get it. And then you made the point that there's all this stuff that leads up to it. And so if you go all the way back to nobody's claimed the safe place. I mean, think about how much effort, how many resources, how many years it took before they could actually show up with the claim that we are the safest car out there, right? So that's all the pre-work that's being done in that space. Think about all the pre-work that went into that car chase, right? There's a lot of premeditation, figuring things out and making sure that people are going to survive the shooting of this scene, right? Right. Until you actually get to, and then you've got to do the editing. I mean, even just after you've done the car chase, you still haven't shown up in the theater yet, right? And then you've got to get people in there to witness it so that they can get, turned on by it. Then you have that kind of visceral response where you say, oh, I got to bring all my friends to see this amazing movie, right? Mm-hmm. So
what do you think for an association, like just naming any association, even if you make them up? It's like, pick a card, any card. Pick an association, any association. And what would be the safe car for them? Or what would be the best car chase ever filmed? And what could they do? Like, let's think about how they could engineer the best of that, right, or the most of that out there. So what
comes to mind is someone who actually did this, and that's the American College of Cardiology. So I worked with them many years ago, and it was when what's the IBM a computer that played Jeopardy?
Oh yeah.
It's got a name,
right?
Not like a normal name,
Simon, but it's
not. Well, I'm sure all of our listeners are thinking of it right now. So send it to me if you're out there. I want to hear
it. Exactly.
Backwards through time. So Watson.
Watson.
So I was actually meeting with the American College of Cardiology's educational group, the staff that were tasked with creating educational experiences for cardiologists, right? And cardiologists are like incredibly smart people. They essentially completed 30 years of training before they've become, that's why cardiologists think that they're God, because they are God. They've got, not only that, but they're comfortable cracking your chest open and, working with your literal beating heart. But this was the group that was in charge of providing them with their continuing education. And Watson had just won on Jeopardy. And the CEO comes into the meeting. He interrupts us and he says to us, up until today, becoming a cardiologist was basically 30 years of memorization. That's what goes on. And now we've got Watson and we don't need memorization anymore. And then he walked out of the room. And it was like he was delivering that message to the education group. So to break their paradigm about what cardiologists need to stay at the head of their game, right?
That was like a mic drop, except with him, it was a heart drop. Right.
So one of the things that came out of that was I worked very closely with the woman who was in charge of really designing the future of the American College of Cardiology's professional development. And they figured out a way for cardiologists to get credit, continuing education credit, for breakthroughs that they themselves created. So there was almost no overhead and time. Normally, when you want to get a continuing education credit, you got to do something. You got to participate in something that's some kind of overhead on your life, right? What she said is, no, if you've done a breakthrough in cardiology, we're going to let you actually just file a form telling us what it is, and we will bestow credits on you for the activity you've already completed. And by doing that, they not only cut the time commitment for cardiologists to get their continuing education credits, but they reinforce the acceleration of innovation in the space, right? So that was a very cool way of doing something like that.
Right. So you're saying that the best car chase ever filmed in that story was what?
A breakthrough that was already taking place outside of the American College of Cardiology by one of their members.
And applied inside.
That's right.
And how could they take that? I guess, by the way, one of the reasons why I fully didn't get the lesson when you were saying that is because I was so stopped when the gentleman said that memorization is kind of not needed anymore. Because to me, knowing like having a wide variety of cases memorized in my head is really almost like the definition of intelligence. So you were telling your story, and I apologize. I hang on your every word, but I was hanging on every other word this time, because on those other words that I wasn't hanging on, I was saying, well, I so disagree with what that person said. Roger Schenck, who I idolize, Roger Schenck is a famous artificial intelligence scientist. And so Schenck, I just love his books and his work. And so Schenck, I believe in a book of his called The Creative Attitude, he talked about that intelligence is packing your mind with different cases, with different facts, with different figures, with different stories. And then you look at what's in front of you and you say, what does this remind me of? Like whether it's directly involved or not, and you pull a story or two stories or something and you see what the connections are. But like, that's what intelligence is. So to me, if you don't have the facts, the stories and whatnot, like packed in your head, if you rely too much on outside sources, if you rest who you are and your thinking is on outside sources, it actually hinders your intelligence. Like you become less and less important. And I'm not just talking about this from some personal thing. I mean, human beings, like you just become, there's just something that can't be replicated if you rely on a system outside of yourself. Is this making sense the way, I feel about this so strongly? Don't refute it, whatever you do.
If it were true that you could rely on an outside source, then you could say anybody could be a cardiologist. Clearly, that's not true. All you need is Watson standing next to you and maybe a rudiment of surgical and medical knowledge.
Right.
Clearly, that's not true. Right. So, how is it that we create, here's another related story. When I was at the World Bank, I was involved in knowledge management. And the core idea behind knowledge management is that what you know is one of the biggest assets that you have. It's not the money in the vault. It's the knowledge in the people who are walking in and out of the building all the time. And so we started this initiative while I was there to really leverage the know-how of our employees and of their peers out in the world who were not World Bank employees to tackle really difficult problems. And there was resistance to this inside the World Bank. And I remember once walking into this economist's office who did not use a computer. And this was in, this was in 1996. So the internet was new, but computers were not. Computers, PCs that were around, they were on the desktop everywhere. And he had piles and piles of paper and pencils in his office. And that was it, and a typewriter. And that's how this guy worked. And he did not want to cooperate with us. He told me, if I tell you everything I know, then I won't have a job. And, first of all, I won't understand everything he knows, right? I looked at his bookshelf, and there were just, tons of periodicals and books that he had written. So if you could just pour that into my head, the amount that I would actually understand compared to him would be a tiny fraction, right? I just wouldn't get it. And I'm sure the same could be said, even if someone in his field, that the amount they would actually grok would just be a fraction of what he was capable of acting on. But that wasn't the point. The point is, we don't want what you've published. We want you in the room. You're the one who wrote all that stuff. You're the one who's carrying all those cases in your head. We want you in real time with your brain processing what's taking place. That's where the value to the organization is in, not in all the stuff that we feed into the system.
But why is that? Why is all the value in him and not in the stuff fed into the system?
Because he's the one who's able to correlate it and apply it and do what you just described, which is to say, how is what's taking place like something else that I've been exposed to before? And what can we learn from that? How might we act on this? Especially when you get into, if you're taking on intractable problems, that means they've never been solved ever. So, what are you going to do? You can't apply a formula. If that worked, we would have already done it. You need real creative thinking, but you need creative thinking by super smart people, by people who have a large storage of these cases.
So then to go back to the Volvo, the safest car on the road, the best car chase ever done. I hadn't even thought that they were both about cars. So One is the best car chase ever staged, and the other's the safest car. They're antithetical.
Yeah, I was going to say they're almost the inverse of each other.
Right. I hadn't even thought about that till now.
Unless you're in the car chase in a Volvo, and then you're safe being really dangerous. I have to go back and watch it and see.
Right. Let's do a movie, the safest car chase ever made. Exactly. So what then for the association? Let's look at another association example. What would the best car chase ever done be for another? Give me another example. And this time I won't zone out when you say something that goes against my belief system.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is immersive technologies and how we can climb inside of things that are normally inaccessible to us now using these immersive technologies. So, for example, earlier today, I was inside of a coronavirus and I was peeling back the membrane and looking at the RNA coiled underneath it. And I was able to look around in space and see the density of coronaviruses around me. That was in an immersive world, in an animated world that had been created. And there was a lot of information there that I was picking up that I didn't know about. Like I didn't realize that the membrane in the coronavirus is extremely thin and it's prone to destruction, which is one of the reasons why you can wash your hands and kill the coronavirus on it. By the same token, a week ago, I was looking inside an integrated circuit chip. I was literally nanometers tall, right? Or you can zoom way out and you could be looking at an entire galaxy to map the gravitational fields of stars and things like that. Well, that's an area where I think people are hungry because there are frontiers of knowledge available there. And if you were to take an astrophysicist, take Neil deGrasse Tyson and give him the ability to play with an immersive technology that could operate at that level of scale, and I'm sure there's all kinds of cool stuff that he'd be looking into and trying to explore. I think that's an area, kind of taking people into what has physically been off limits that's important to their particular profession or trade.
What would be an example for an association, even if it doesn't really exist?
Sure. The American Geophysical Union, which is the Earth and space scientists, could take us down inside a volcano so that we could take a look at what's taking place below the surface of the Earth inside the lava and answer questions around, early detection or circumstances that impact the formation of the volcano. That'd be an example.
What about, because the idea is still a good one conceptually, even without the physical, the idea of associations taking their members into places that they couldn't see before conceptually, or that they didn't even know existed,
right.
How would that, right? And I'm not talking about through AI. I'm talking about visualization. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what lecturing or so. Tell me.
So we're going to have to wait for the next episode, but I am going to take you to some place that you're normally not allowed to go. And I will do that when we start the next episode.
Oh my God. All right. Excellent.
See you
there, everyone.
Bye-bye.